She thought he was too broke to matter, a struggling student from a no-name seaside town, the kind of guy who'd fade into obscurity after graduation while she climbed the social ladder in one of England's most exclusive postcodes. She didn't know he'd just bought the house next door in her £800,000 neighborhood for pocket change. And when she found out, when she pounded on his door hard enough to summon every neighbor on the street, her face twisted into something between rage and pure panic. Because the man she'd destroyed 5 years ago was now the one person she couldn't escape. Let's rewind to where this all started. University, third year. Two 30-year-olds grinding through coursework in a brutalist campus library that smelled like instant coffee and desperation. He was the quiet type. Kept his head down, turned in assignments early, ran 5 miles every morning before lectures to keep his mind clear. She was different, louder, the kind of person who walked into a seminar room like she owned the air itself, designer bag slung over one shoulder, always talking about her hometown like it was Buckingham Palace with better weather. X-Town. She dropped that name constantly, casually, the way people mention they summer in the Hamptons or winter in Aspen. Every conversation somehow looped back to it. The seafront properties, the Michelin-starred restaurants her family frequented, the private schools, the yacht club her father had memberships to. It wasn't bragging, not technically. It was worse. It was a constant dripping reminder that she came from money, from status, from somewhere that mattered. And he was from Y-Town. Another coastal spot, sure, but the kind tourists visited for fish and chips, not 5-star resorts. He never corrected her assumptions. Never told her his mother used to vacation in X-Town every single year, back when she was healthy enough to travel. Never mentioned that he knew those streets better than she probably did, that he'd walk that seafront promenade holding his mom's hand as a kid, watching the sunset paint the Victorian buildings gold. He just let her talk. Let her weave this narrative where she was the sophisticated one, and he was harmless, forgettable, safe. They became close anyway, or at least he thought they had. Daily coffee between lectures, late-night study sessions where she'd complain about her workload while he actually did the work. Group projects where she'd show up 15 minutes late with Starbucks and expect him to have already outlined the structure. He didn't mind. She was his friend, and friends tolerate each other's flaws. The sacred part of this story, the part that makes everything else hit differently, is what X-Town actually meant to him. When he was 19, his mother lost her battle with breast cancer, 2 years of treatments that drained their savings and left her a shadow of who she'd been. And in her final weeks, when she could barely speak, she'd asked him for one thing, to scatter her ashes in X-Town, by the sea, where she'd felt happiest. So he did. Took the train alone, walked to the beach at dawn, and released her into the wind above the waves. It wasn't poetic. It was cold and brutal, and he cried so hard he thought his chest would crack open. But it was hers. That town, that water, that gray English morning, it belonged to his mother now. Every grain of sand held a piece of her memory. He never told his university friend this, never gave her that ammunition. And looking back, thank God he didn't. 4th year. Final dissertation. He'd spent 6 months on his research. Original analysis, primary sources, the kind of work that could actually get published if he played it right. He'd shown her his notes once, during one of their study sessions. She'd leaned over his laptop, skimming the introduction, nodding with that vague interest people fake when they're not really listening. 2 weeks before the deadline, she submitted her dissertation early. Unheard of for her. She was always the last-minute type, the one begging for extensions and crying to professors about personal emergencies. But this time, she was done, confident, smug even. He found out 3 days after submitting his own work. An email from the Academic Integrity Board. Cold, formal language about plagiarism concerns and mandatory investigation. His stomach dropped into his shoes. He read it twice, 3 times, trying to understand what they were accusing him of. Then he saw the attachment, sections of his dissertation, word for word, in someone else's submission. Hers. She'd copied his work. Not all of it, just enough to be damning. Enough that the university flagged both submissions and assumed he was the copycat because she'd submitted first. She'd stolen his research, his analysis, his voice, and she'd timed it so perfectly that he looked like the plagiarist. The investigation took 5 weeks, 5 weeks of meetings with stone-faced administrators who looked at him like he was scum. 5 weeks of her ignoring his calls, his texts, his desperate attempts to explain what happened. 5 weeks of watching her walk across campus with her head high while he felt his entire future crumbling. He was eventually cleared, barely. The committee found inconsistencies in her submission, writing quality that didn't match her previous work. But the damage was done. His reputation had a stain. Professors looked at him differently. And her? She got a slap on the wrist, a grade reduction, and walked away clean. After graduation, she vanished from his life completely. No apology, no acknowledgement, just silence. And he took a job in London, rebuilt himself brick by brick, and tried to forget the betrayal. But X-Town stayed in his mind, his mother's resting place, the place that felt like home even though he'd never lived there. He'd scroll real estate listings late at night, just looking, dreaming. Properties in X-Town didn't come cheap. 3-bedroom terraced houses went for $800K, seafront flats for even more. It was impossibly out of reach for someone like him, a quiet guy with a London salary and student debt still hanging around his neck. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that he was patient, methodical, the kind of person who saves every extra pound and watches the market like a hawk. Because one day, just maybe, he'd find a way back to the place his mother loved. And one day, he did. The listing appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Property in X-Town, 3 bedrooms, period features, seafront location. Price, £325,000. He stared at his laptop screen in the sterile break room of his London office, convinced it was a typo. Properties in X-Town didn't sell for $325K. They sold for triple that, quadruple if you had sea views. He clicked through the photos, peeling wallpaper, carpets that looked like they'd absorbed 30 years of cigarette smoke, a kitchen that belonged in a museum exhibit about the 1970s. The bathroom had mold creeping up the corners and tiles missing from the shower. Every room screamed money pit, nightmare, runaway. But the location pin on the map made his breath catch in his throat. 5-minute walk from where he'd scattered his mother's ashes. 8-minute walk to the train station with direct service to central London. The beach stretched out just beyond the back garden. Not a distant view you needed binoculars for, but actual proximity. Close enough to hear the waves at night, close enough to run on the sand every morning before work, the way he'd been doing in London parks but always wished he could do by the sea. The property needed modernizing, total renovation, builders, electricians, plumbers, the works. But it was affordable because of that, and he'd been saving. Living in a cramped London flat with roommates to keep rent low, eating meal prep instead of takeout, skipping the pub on Fridays while his coworkers drank their paychecks. Every pound saved was a pound closer to this impossible dream. He put in an offer that night, no viewing, no second thoughts. Just a straight cash offer that made the estate agent pause before confirming it was serious. 3 weeks later, he owned it. The builders started before Christmas, rewiring, replumbing, ripping out decades of decay. He stayed in London, checking in via phone calls with the foreman, watching costs climb but staying within budget. Barely. He didn't step foot inside the property until after New Year's Day, wanting to see it only when the worst was behind him. When he finally walked through the door in early January, paint cans and tools still scattered across the floor, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. The place still needed work, his work, the finishing touches he'd handle himself. But it was his. In the town his mother loved, in the neighborhood his ex-friend had bragged about owning like it was her birthright. He didn't know she lived next door, hadn't thought to check. Why would he? She was a ghost from his past, someone he'd actively tried to forget. The universe, though, had a sick sense of humor. 3 weeks into his DIY renovation phase, he was outside scraping paint off the front windowsills when the Amazon van rolled up. The driver hopped out, package in hand, tried the neighbor's door. No answer. The guy turned to him, desperate to clear his delivery quota, and asked if he could take the package for next door. He started to say yes, automatic politeness, the British reflex, but then he saw the name on the label. A unique spelling. The kind of name you don't forget even when you've spent 5 years trying to. His hand froze mid-reach. His stomach turned to ice. Her. She lived next door, in the house adjacent to his dream property. The woman who'd stolen his work, destroyed his reputation, and walked away without a backward glance was his neighbor. In the 800K neighborhood, she'd lorded over him. Right next to the fixer-upper she would have assumed he could never afford. He told the driver no, didn't explain. Just a flat refusal that left the guy confused before he shrugged and took the package back to the depot. And then he stood there in his paint-stained clothes, scraper still in hand, processing the cosmic irony of what had just happened. The pounding on his door came at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. Not a knock, not a polite ring of the doorbell. Full fist hammering that rattled the frame and echoed down the street. He opened it to find her standing there, face flushed red, eyes wild with something between fury and disbelief. She didn't ask how he was, didn't acknowledge the years of silence. She just started yelling, loud enough that curtains twitched in windows up and down the block. Neighbors emerged from their homes, retired couples, young families, the street's usual suspects, all drawn by the commotion of a well-dressed woman losing her mind on a doorstep. She demanded to know what he was doing there, accused him of stalking her, of deliberately buying the house to harass her. Her voice climbed higher with each accusation, cracking on the edges, spit flying as she gestured wildly. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching her unravel. Calm, silent, unbothered. The neighbors stared. Some filmed on their phones, others whispered behind hands. This was her neighborhood, her domain, and she was making a scene that would be gossip fuel for months. The sophisticated woman from the fancy family, screaming at her new neighbor like a banshee. When she finally ran out of breath, when the rage exhausted itself into something closer to panic, she made her demand clear. He needed to move, immediately. Sell the house, leave, go back to wherever broke students from Y-Town belonged, because she couldn't live next to him, wouldn't tolerate it. He let the silence hang for 5 long seconds, let her feel the weight of every eye on the street watching this moment. Then he spoke, calm and even, just loud enough for the neighbors to hear. He wasn't going anywhere. The days after were delicious. She tried everything, called her parents, who apparently rang his phone demanding he reconsider. He blocked the number. She complained to other neighbors, painting him as a creep, a stalker, someone dangerous. But he'd already introduced himself to most of them, polite, helpful, the guy who'd helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries. Her story didn't stick. She started closing her curtains whenever he was outside, stopped using her front door, sneaking out through the back garden to avoid seeing him. Meanwhile, he thrived. Woke up every morning at 6 a.m., stepped onto the beach, and ran 5 miles with the sea breeze in his face and his mother's memory in every breath. Took the train to London twice a week for work, came home to his dream renovation project, lived the exact life she'd assumed he'd never achieve. The irony was perfect. She'd tried to bury him with that plagiarism scheme, to mark him as a failure while she soared. And now she was trapped, living in her parents' house. He'd learned she'd never actually moved out, just talked about X-Town like she owned property there, watching him own actual real estate in the neighborhood she'd gatekept for years. He was living next to the place he'd scattered his mother's ashes, in the town that meant everything to him, in a house he'd renovated with his own hands. And she? She was the one who couldn't escape, couldn't move without admitting defeat, couldn't even look out her window without seeing evidence that the quiet student she'd underestimated had won. Every morning when he left for his beach run, she was the ghost now, hiding, panicking, regretting. And he didn't spare her a single thought. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for karma to catch up with the ones who wronged them. But the truth, real justice doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It doesn't need revenge plots or confrontation. Sometimes it's just a quiet man buying a house, running on a beach, and living well while the person who tried to bury him watches from behind closed curtains. If stories like this one hit different for you, the ones where patience wins, where the underestimated rise, where the arrogant fall without a single word needing to be said, then you're in the right place. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Hit the like button if you believe some victories are worth the wait.